Pietro is a great game designer. I had a chance to know him for the past 6 years. He makes amazing applied games. It's here to talk about a very special project about storytelling and football.
The audio is here.
You need to put it into accents. Yeah, you can talk. Changing video games, sports, storytelling. Pietro Polsinelli. Yes, please give him an applause.
Okay, so hi, and so I'm gonna talk about writing narrative in sport games. And so the notes, what I'm gonna tell you about is my experience in developing a game, and I'll just show you a quick video. Let's see. So, in this game I did the coding and the writing, and this is the full team. The core of the game was developed by 2 guys, and of course we got some help from the others. So now games about football, which is the specific thing I'm going to talk about, usually are simulation games, or as management games. You can look at them also as simulation games. And there have been, particularly recently, some attempts to given the amount of attention in games that have some more refined approaches to narratives, to do some experiments, but the results are, let's say, not totally great. But actually, in the field of football games, there have been some, apart from the like the major games, but there have been some very interesting experiments, and some, one is Lords of Football, which was never actually completely finished, and the other one, I got also some ideas and inspiration, is Flick Kick Football, but in that case, the mechanics is so good, and that it somehow shadows the narrative part, which is quite curated, but it's not so clear in the gameplay experience. So actually, my idea of having a narrative game on football came from a random encounter, because I'm not a great football fan, at least I wasn't. And because I met some friends, I met so many friends that were like writers or passionate about literature, novels, and so on. And I was surprised, discovered their, let's say, enormous passion for football, and what a detailed knowledge they had of the field. So I inquired, and actually I discovered that there is wonderful and really extensive literature about football, not about just the technicality of the football, but really novels and short stories and storytelling and really beautiful stuff. First of all, of course, from the South American writers like Soriano and Galeano, which are writers known for other works, for their novels, for their short stories, but then they also wrote some really interesting stuff about football. And then from this it came, and I started inquiring, and I found the British writers, Hornby, of course, and there's a whole set of writings and beautiful short stories. And from here, it actually never ends. It's really a big field, writing, and also poetry, and Handke, and Italian poets, and Pasolini, and so on. All these people were writing about football, but they were writing and with a perspective that I didn't seem to find in games. And then I also looked at other media, so in case of movies and documentaries with a special approach. And there too, there's lots of wonderful things. In particular, I discovered this movie, which is both in Spanish and Italian, but has also a version with English subtitles, in Mondial Dimenticato, the Forgotten World Cup, which is a so-called mockumentary about a World Cup that has been forgotten, 1942 World Cup in Patagonia. Anyway, so all this approach started made me think that maybe we could have something like this in games. And of course, narrative and football also merges with sociological and society considerations and about how football is to be considered. And there are, let's say, divisive and different opinions about this. We'll get back to this later. Maybe we can also discuss it, I hope. So this all leads to the question of what is football, and this led me, and what and why and what it is as a phenomenon in society, to actually the authors, which has been my main reference in the whole build-up of this game, which is Roland Barthes. And because he was an anthropologist, but a very special anthropologist, and anthropology as a field, we know that somehow collapsed, but he had a different approach. So he looked at contemporary society from an anthropological point of view, and he was always pointing out the presence of myth and right in our everyday life, in the society as we live them today. And I think this is a very interesting and very inspiring approach. So this is how the idea came about. And I started writing, and sorry, but I was also encouraged by the fact that in recent years we had several examples of narrative games, call them new narrative games, that have shown that we can, even with very limited means, with indie groups, we can find new innovative ways of creating narratives on one side. So each of these games has somehow created their own way of telling stories, which also not necessarily through words. But also another very important thing that they've shown, I think, is that the fact you can use games to tell stories about any subject whatsoever. Of course, this was also my experience because I've been working for many years in applied games. And so, but this somehow convinced me that this approach was possible. And of course, this kind of evolution and acquiring awareness has happened in other media. This is a kind of natural evolution of a media, and we've seen it in movies, in comics, which is for me a very important inspiration, and we see it, and I think it's we've seen it in video games. Okay, so when I started writing, I had problems too, because writing about sports requires some specific technical knowledge and skills. And also because I discovered that every nation and every football language has its own bewildering dialect. And there's a beautiful book about this. And so as I wanted to have the narrative not just outside the games, but also inside the game. So I wanted to have a log, a description, live description of what was happening. I had to learn this lingo, this dialect. And it's very interesting that different nations have different versions of it, but some parts of it are shared. And also very interesting the fact that some, like in English, there are many expressions which are by now used only in football. So, and there are many, many, many of them. And so you got to know the language to understand it. And of course, if you want to do a game, you have to use the proper language when you're describing it. Then well, this is my writing style. I wanted to merge also, of course, considerations from the society into which football lives. So I used English mixed with Nadsat, which is the Russian-inspired language of Clockwork Orange. And then I also used the I Ching and other stuff, the Book of Changes and Inspiration. So it was very interesting for the poor translators when they had to translate the game, because they had to somehow translate from a partially invented language into another language. In particular, when I talked with a very patient Chinese translator, and she had to somehow translate back the I Ching, traditional Chinese characters and explanations back into Chinese, and I discovered that the Chinese people today don't understand the I Ching characters, so it was a bit of a problem. Anyway, so that was very interesting. And also so writing for games can be a very stimulating experience, because you get to write all kinds of different texts for different things, from the UI, from the game commentators, from dialogues. And I even had to write lyrics of a song. So I had to follow the metrics and put all the variations, because when the singer is singing, of course, she may use different speeds and so on. And so for the first time, I wrote a song, which is sang by Marta Ascari. And I will hopefully, yeah. Why is it not working? Yes, it's working.
They had nothing on me. Oh, I was as clean as she. They had nothing, no bribe. Oh, until you came with your pipe. My life was peachy and dough. Me being king and beau. Money came with no shame. Power being the real game. Swiss and Catholic means having the knack for always getting a cut. They had nothing on me. Oh, they had nothing on me.
Okay, so one of the things that we worked in the game was on the representation of dialogues. Dialogues in games often have a very basic, like some UI form. And this is something we wanted to work on it and try to improve. And again, what we did, we looked at other media. So, and if you know about contemporary modern comics and graphic novels, so you will see there that the usage of the fonts and integration with the design and the usage of the cameras in how to cut the scenes and the views can be really amazing. And we said, well, why don't we start doing this also in video game dialogues? So we developed a system of how to handle both the balloons, the styles of the balloons, and also using the camera, which you can find offline. We already wrote about this. But what's important was that this system wouldn't be hard-coded, of course. So this could be like a layer of direction that the writer can use with the narrative tool, so while writing. So with annotations on the writings, you can somehow change the direction and the style of how the dialogues are represented. And so all this ended in the game. Okay, so once one has written dialogue, stories, plot, and so on, you have to somehow put this in the game. And in the case of a game on sport, there are very specific problems that you will have to meet if you have a branching narrative and a championship. So I will try to go through all these. So momentum and championship. So momentum is a big problem in narrative games, and I won't go into that because I will refer to John Ingold's beautiful smart class, a video that you can find on YouTube about this. But still, now, and in the case of a sport game, this somehow is a problem, and it isn't. I will try to explain this. So the problem is, so you have a branching narrative, okay, which is not completely deterministic, and so you don't know exactly when the player will do things or how things will go, okay? But then on the other side, in parallel, you have a championship. So this is not a single game. You have to go through a whole championship. And of course, a championship has a fixed rhythm, okay? Okay, that wouldn't be that much of a problem if you didn't have alongside that expectations, because this is a game where you're a football manager and there are expectations about your results, and so if your results are bad, the story may end anytime. So that's a sort of permadeath that we have in this game. But so how do you synchronize the fact that I'm making certain life choices with the fact that there are expectations from the club about my results? And so the two things have to somehow go together. But this is a good thing and a bad thing. I was telling you why. Because the good thing is that I don't have the momentum problem much, because of the tension that is created by the fact that you can be fired anytime, or also positively by the fact that you can have great result and be leading the championship anytime. That too creates an emotion. So in my case, this in a football game, the tension created by this is so strong that there's not much risk that you don't get like the push to go forward. But the problem is when the two timeline, the championship timeline and the branching narrative timeline, how does this is not from a time more about the size of your model. How do life choices and championship events interact? Because if you have some experience in game design, you will see that this is bound to create a huge combinatorial space and also make the evolution of the narrative while you're building the game very rigid. And this is absolutely something you absolutely don't want. So, well, the usual trick in game design to collapse combinatorial space is to introduce cards, and cards limit the dimensions that you're using. And so that's what we did. So somehow the life choices generate some cards which are somehow express your style of management and that you can use while in the matches. Okay, the matches are not card-based because I want them to have much more flow and speed, but you can anytime do these special moves through the cards that so which cards you actually get to have to play during the match. So the idea is that you're shouting orders from the bench and when you're playing the cards. So which cards you get depends on which life choices you're making. And also these two determine like two super dimensions, which are whether you're karmatic or chaotic manager. And if you know a bit about football, it's clear that football management and football managers are in these two classes. There are managers who thrive on conflict, thrive on conflict, and used it as a way of stimulating aggressiveness in play and in the players. And there are other kind of managers that try to create harmony and communication with the team, and somehow, and both can work. And also in the game, you can take a more karmatic and win the game, or chaotic style and somehow win the game. The game has 24 different endings. So, of course, one thing to be said, was a game produced by completely independently, and so mostly by two guys working on it part-time. So I could sell it to you as like a stylistic choice, but actually it was due to limited means. So we left a lot of space in the game to the player's imagination. I also like it stylistically, but it also was due to what we could actually do. And so I noticed that this works only for a certain kind of people. So it's not really a game for everyone. So for some people, the fact that the game somehow leaves you a lot of space to imagine what's happening. It never shows you the players, and lots of things are hinted. You never know how consulting the book of changes actually can change what's happening in the game. So for some people and some review, this works very well, and for others, this tells very little. But so that's how it goes. Another typical problem that you will have in a game about sport is that sports championships have this looping structure, okay? So but there are some things like meeting the press after every match, or talking with the club owner, discovering whether you've been fired or not at the end of the match, that will repeat in time. So you need somehow a narrative tool which has variables, repetitions, and support somehow semi-generative structure to create variations there and know what to happen in order not to hard code tons of stuff, and also make it possible for it to be translated. So you somehow have to separate the context from the dynamics and the variables of the structure, okay? Now, often we say that narrative is hard to make good and fun, and good and fun narrative games. But actually, somebody noticed also that narrative can solve a lot of problems. So once we had this framework of layouts and style and usage of camera usage in the dialogues, we could do a lot of stuff just with dialogues. Okay, this also brings down the costs of development. So that we could do like the press meeting with a dialogue, just by representing the press with the microphones. So we had two characters. And the same we could do like the so-called coach drama. So that is the fact that if the two managers will shake hands or not at the end of the match, which is, this game is called football drama, so we have to show this kind of stuff. And again, that was another dialogue, and so on. So this simplified development a lot, while allowing us to have graphical variation. So focus our very, very limited energy in what we could do. Another problem that I wanted to model in the game is the underdog, which is actually one of the factors that make football so interesting for many. So the fact that the weaker team in football always has a chance, almost always has a chance. Okay, this is also because by the nature, the field is very big, the matches are long, and it's hard to score. And so if you look at the dynamic of a game, it's never that one of the teams controls the game 95 minutes, the full time of a match. So I wanted to model the fact that somehow, even if you're dominating the game, there are moments where your superior power is combined with this wave of performance. So in football, there's this wave. So sometimes the dominating, the stronger team has been having possession for like 90% of the time, but suddenly they also, to open spaces, they go back and they give a chance for the others to attack and control. And so there is this wave. So I created, I multiply all the 16 dimensions of power that your team has with these waves. And so if you, in the match, if you become skilled in play and are attentive the right moment, you start pushing and risking the right moment. Even if you're a weaker team, you can somehow get to score. And so this, of course, I could have done this just by introducing more randomness, but too much randomness is felt by the players and somehow ruins the feeling of depth of the game. So I try to really limit randomness as much as possible. Okay, then there's a lot of narrative that somehow it's inside the game, and I had to somehow express what's happening in the game without having a complete emulator of the football match, because that is very complex and would be also very expensive. So I simplified the field in 12 areas, so somehow the ball is transferring from one area to the other. I generate a complete commentator's log. So there are 2 commentators, and one is actually here. You would recognize this, it's him in the game. And so they talk, they say what's happening, and so this somehow evokes what is actually happening. You don't see the play, you just see the ball, and you're following the ball. And then I have, only for the main actions, I have a really generative emulator of the goals and what's happening there, and this somehow limited development and complexity. And so what I'm actually doing, I'm doing a very detailed narrative part, and the emulation is only evocative part. And with some people, this works very well. So this is how it goes. So you see here on your left, this is how the position and the ball represents where the action is going, but only when the action becomes really dangerous, then the emulator opens and you see live action, which is partially scripted and partially generative. But if you want to ask me about that, I will be here the whole day, so we can talk about the more technical aspects. Then finally, the cards. I'm checking just the time. The cards are. These are the special moves that you can gain with the narrative choices. And you see each one tries to tell a little story, like a satirical cards, and you can play them during the matches. And okay, so one of the problems one should deal with in a narrative game always is the problem of replayability. And well, this, I must say, it's a game built for mobile, and it's not like 20 hours of gameplay. And also, we didn't have the means to develop a huge branching narrative. So in our case, the replayability is scarce, and that's one of the limits of the game that we did. Yeah, so I tried to find a sport metaphor for this. Maybe it doesn't work very well, but anyway. And so replayability, you can replay it, but there are a few branching stories that you can actually replay. And So basically, the game doesn't. It's like an inquiry, an experiment in approaching football in this way, and so this Pasolini writes. As Pasolini, he gives the reason why I was interested in creating this game, and also somehow the message that the game tries to give. And yeah, so of course I don't have a specific answer to what is football. And one very last thing is like a note, if you are indie developers or writing a game, is that if you go to bit.ly old drama, I put a free version of the game. It's in WebGL, also works on the desktop, and only it doesn't work on a mobile, where you can see how the game was 1 year before release. So we had everything, mechanics, prototype, illustrations, cards, so everything was in place, but still we were like halfway in development, even if it was working, because the game feel. So this is just to make you feel the game feel. So the game feel, the amount of work that just goes into refining the animations, refining the transitions, increasing, improving the buttons, feels, and things like this is enormous in a game. And sometimes I know by experience it doesn't get budget or considered in the effort, but it's a really big part of the effort of developing a game. So that's it. I hope there's some time for questions, or?
Hello. Now that you finished this project, would you go back and maybe choose another sport to do it with instead of football? Because now you say, I could tell so many better stories, like the narrative part.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what happens. So I don't know whether I'm not a world expert of stories about football, but there are many other. I know that many other. There are beautiful books about other life stories in other fields, in other sports, and I'm actually working already on another, which is on roller derby, and which has some pretty amazing stories, and also because football drama is like looks at football as it was. It was a football only of males. I mean, it's a football of the past. And roller derby is like, for me, it's like a representation of the future of the sport. So it's a girls, at least my game will be about girls rollers derby, and yeah, and there too, so many stories. So yes, you can find stories in so many sports fields.
Yes, hello. To continue with the question about if you will go back to another sport, I think sport is a really good entry to talk about politics and the society. Yes, at the same time, you almost answered my question when you talked about roller derby. And do you have any other time you want to talk about, other years, period of time with other sports? Because for me, I work with racing games, and I'm really interested with Formula One and how it really shows capitalism in its core game loop, where the team who win gain more money with that, and then win again and again and again, and how the little teams are struggling to get the little pieces of a cake to get better and better, but they can't.
Yeah, you would think that Formula One would be one of the sports with practically no drama, but instead it has a huge amount of drama. Yes. Fighting, spying, and the stories behind it. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's bizarre because, as Galeano was pointing out, there's also a very conservative side to the attention to sport. So you have to. It's hard, I think, to find the balance there, and yeah, it's intriguing. For sure, it's intriguing. Yeah, and it's a way. Yeah, this is something I want to tell you. So for me, it was also very important the fact that you somehow do an effort to speak to a large audience, okay? And also this is a test that you're making about the quality of your game design. So am I capable of telling a story which is maybe non-trivial, but also reach a large audience? This is like a test to quality. So I'm not talking to myself, like writing, write with the door open. And and the same can be said for game design, so this can be interesting.
Okay, we have to stop. Thank you, Pietro. So we invite you to come back at 1:30 for the talk by Delphine Fourneau, Work, Art and Fun. So this is the lunch break. If you could leave the space, we need it for a rehearsal, so thank you by advance. And have a good lunch.